The time has finally come to debate what the true game of the decade is. We have 10 strong contenders, one for every year of the decade, and here they are. 2010's Super Mario Galaxy 2, 2011's The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, 2012's Kid Icarus Uprising, 2013's The Last of Us, 2014's Tropical Freeze, 2015's Splatoon, 2016 Doom, 2017 The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, 2018 Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and last but not least, congratulations to 2019's Dragon Quest XI's Definitive Edition for taking the crown for that year. And guess what? That's not all, because we have two final contenders as decided by our audience. First up is the winner of the Losers Bracket, in which one of the games we had previously brought to the table as a potential nominee gets a second chance at the top slot, and that honor goes to 2012's Xenoblade Chronicles. Next, the audience was also able to submit a game of their own that none of us had brought to the table, and that honor goes to Persona 5. So, for this final debate, the format is simple. Each game will have a strictly enforced 5-minute window in which we'll all debate the merits of it as Game of the Decade, before moving on to the next game. And at the end, we'll have one final 5-minute discussion to discuss the overall selection. And once we're done, we're off to vote. And you should too, much as you have been the entire time as a 6th Game Explained member. Just use the link in the description below to make your voice heard. Then stay tuned tomorrow to find out which game ends up being the Game of the Decade. And with that, let's get to the final showdown.
For the Game of the Decade, this stage simply won't do.
And let's start off with 2010's winner being Super Mario Galaxy 2. Why should this game be or not be the Game of the Decade?
I mean, you argued for it. You won this round, Andre, with your presentation and everything. So why is it Game of the Decade?
I mean, I feel like I said everything I needed to at the time, Derek, and the game really speaks for itself. I'll speak for it anyway, though. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is basically 3D platforming perfected. I don't think it gets much better than this. It took a great idea, refined it even more, added even crazier level designs than its predecessor, and it resulted in one of the finest experiences in 3D gaming. Yeah, not just for Mario, in 3D gaming in general. Like the anti-gravity, the running around globes, the jumping between different planets, it's all brilliant stuff, and it really is like Nintendo perhaps at the top of their game. It is just a fantastic experience through and through, and I think it's definitely worthy of being Game of the Decade on the pure merits of its gameplay alone.
I'm a little foggy, but isn't this the one where you fight Bowser in the middle of the sun and he falls into the sun?
It's like a black hole, I think, or something.
Yeah, black hole.
Yeah.
I remember it being much more epic than the final boss of the original Galaxy.
Yeah, he's actually way bigger. Like it feels a little bit more menacing. Whereas in Mario Galaxy, the music helped a lot, I think. But yeah, you're just on these small globes as Bowser spins after you.
Yeah.
It's hard to deny how good this game is. Both Galaxy games are so good, and they're kind of two parts of one whole. But I've ever since Odyssey came out, I've wondered if I'd rank Galaxy 2 higher than Odyssey or not. And seeming as we didn't even put Odyssey on this list, I'm not entirely sure if I would vote Galaxy 2 as Game of the Decade.
Same.
Really?
For me, Galaxy 2, and I said this before, it just lost a lot of the magic that the first Galaxy had for me, not just in a gameplay sense. Obviously, Galaxy 2 is going to feel a little bit more of an iteration, clearly, but just in a general, in a vibe sense, in a story sense. And I know Mario's not known for story, but Galaxy 1 did it so well, and Galaxy 2 just lost all that charm and that magic for me. Still a fantastic game. I can't argue against how great the game itself is, but Andre, you yourself did nominate Super Mario Odyssey. It didn't win, but if you say Galaxy 2 is 3D platforming perfected, where does Odyssey sit in relation to that?
Because Super Mario Galaxy 2 is more of a pure platformer than Mario Odyssey is, which is
sure.
I don't even know what you classify that as exactly, more collectathon style. So I think they're two very separate types of games. I find comparing them to be a little bit difficult because while the moment-to-moment gameplay may be similar, the overall structure is very different. And I think that does result in different experiences.
Right.
So yeah, I actually don't know. I would be torn between those two. So it almost works out that I can only go to bat for Super Mario Galaxy 2. I will say, in defense of its story, I love Super Mario Galaxy story. I thought it was great. I don't know if it needed to be repeated again. And also, I think its presence is a little bit overstated. It wasn't a big part of the original game. It was barely in the original game. That storybook sequence is maybe 5 minutes tops, spread across 20, 30-hour adventure. So I think it's a little bit overstated how much it adds to the game, especially given the fact it's totally optional. I'm sure people out there didn't even see it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Galaxy 2 is kind of a gamer's game. It's all about that gameplay, finding new ways to do things, having fun with each of the new powers and crazy ideas they come up with. It really is just, here's the package, enjoy.
Yeah, everything was
It's very
crafted around
streamlined.
mechanics, and the levels just feel really good as a result of that. It's just a very, as you're saying, like a purely gamer's game. So
I will say that I don't think all the green stars are that strong. I felt a few of them were a little bit tedious to get. Like maybe if it was more sandboxy, the level design, they would have been a bit better to get your hands on. But because the levels were designed in a linear fashion for just like 1 or 2 stars, I feel like some of them just didn't really fit in that well.
I feel like I'm being grilled again on. Okay, if we're getting into the realm now of collectibles that aren't that satisfying to collect, I can't wait until we get to Breath of the Wild.
Oh man.
It felt a little bit too streamlined to me to go from Galaxy 1 to the rote world map format of Galaxy 2. It just felt a little too traditional when it didn't need to be, when Galaxy was anything but traditional. And Galaxy 2 just felt like it reined things in a little bit too much. And that's what I mean by the general vibe. Not just the storybook sequence, but just the general vibe. Like, you go from Mario venturing to the center of the universe to save Peach to whatever Galaxy 2 is. It's just kind of, here's the world map. Go through it.
I mean, that's basically the same as Galaxy 2. In defense of the world map, Super Mario Galaxy was also broken up into world maps. It was just connected by a pretty meandering hub where there wasn't a whole lot to do. Where Super Mario Galaxy just basically took all those singular world maps and combined them into one. And it did result in a streamlined experience, I found. And that is time, so we're moving on to 2011's winner, being Zelda Skyward Sword. Why did this game deserve or not deserve to be the game of the decade?
Well, I think it deserves to be there just because it is just a very narratively satisfying game if you're there for Zelda. If you're there for Zelda stories, I think it's a great one. I think it has enough innovation with its gameplay and the fact that it used the Wii Remote Plus that it did catch on. And granted, that also is what makes it so divisive. And I think that's what makes Skyward Sword such an interesting choice for 2011. It really is a very divisive game.
Some of the best dungeons in the entire series as well. Do you remember that dungeon where you start off on this sort of beautiful, colourful, how to describe it? I guess it's like a water sort of dungeon.
The Ancient Cistern, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
I love that dungeon.
Yeah, and it's like this hellscape underground. You get imprisoned in a dungeon, and you've got to work your way up, climbing a rope as enemies, like these zombie enemies, chase after you. That's just such a great dungeon. Then there's the time-shifting stones. There's so many great things about Skyward Sword.
But there's also a lot of things that aren't that great. If we're going to be talking about world maps, how has no one mentioned the sky yet? And it's completely lacking presence in this game. Or rather, I take that back. It's not lacking presence. It's notable for how boring and empty it is.
Yeah, it's the Great Sea done wrong. They somehow took something they already had done right and completely screwed it up. The sky...
Great Sea done wrong is a powerful statement.
Well, I like the Great Sea. Remember, I'm a huge Wind Waker fan. I liked exploring the Great Sea. The sky, by comparison, it was so boring. There's almost nothing to find. There's just nothing interesting out there. And I agree with you, John. The Ancient Cistern was amazing. One of my favorite Zelda dungeons ever. But that's the problem. It's maybe the highlight of the entire game. Skyward Sword has some high highs, but I can't defend that world design. I love the waggle gameplay. I love the one-to-one sword controls. I'd love to see them again, but not with that world design. I hated the segmented world design in Skyward Sword.
Sure, and I think Skyloft was meant to be like a cozy hub to keep returning to, but it was very small. There was very little to actually do in Skyloft.
I don't know, I like talking to each of the people, finding out different things. Sometimes you get little side missions or just talk to it. I found, well, you like to use this word a lot during this game of the decade, John. I found it cozy. I did find it.
We are banning that word. None of you know what it means anymore. Jesus, read a dictionary. Skyward Sword, I would say it's a good game, but I don't think it's the best Zelda game. That'll probably come to discussion with in 2017 as well. Yeah, I think it's a good game, but yeah, I can't see it being like propped up or shown as being the game of the decade. I just don't think it's strong enough all around. Especially taking into account that we have another Zelda coming up, which...
yeah. As we said, it has the highest highs, but it has some of the lowest lows as well.
And that Zelda was pretty much in reaction to this Zelda, so...
That is true.
Right.
Yeah, I can't really in good conscience argue for Skyward Sword to be Game of the Decade, knowing that Breath of the Wild came 6 years later. I think it's a fantastic game. I absolutely love it. And until Breath of the Wild, it was my favorite Zelda game. But I think it's just objectively inferior to Breath of the Wild. So it's really hard for me to put up an argument that this is going to be the best game of the decade.
But now if we ignored Breath of the Wild, how would we be feeling about Skyward Sword?
I still feel like you can shave off 10, 20 hours of this game and it'll be better for it. There's a lot of padding, a lot of unnecessary content.
Tatones.
Remember that time they flooded Farron Woods and you had to go back through and just swim through? It was such a meaningless way to pad out the game, in my opinion, and that was just kind of some of Skyward Sword in general. A good game for sure, but I cannot argue for it for Game of the Decade.
To its credit, that I think that is a neat idea. It's just the execution didn't work. I like revisiting past areas in a new way, and swimming through the forest is kind of cool. But yeah, what you're doing there isn't very fun. I will say though that one thing this game did that's unique, I think, is it kind of made the overworld part of like almost dungeon-like in many respects. So there are puzzles now in the overworld, and you're solving puzzles pretty much constantly when you're on the ground in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, that is cool, but it's also kind of exhausting, because you're going from this sort of puzzle-orientated overworld to a puzzle-orientated dungeon.
Yeah, I will defend what Derek said, though. Story-wise, and musically especially, it's one of the best Zelda games. It's straight up, character-wise, story-wise. If you want a good characters, good story, great music, Skyward Sword has all of it.
Yeah, that's definitely correct. It has the best characterization of any game in the series, hands down, and the best story by, like, a landslide.
Are we including Majora's Mask in this discussion?
Wind Waker would disagree, sir.
I love how two other Zelda games immediately got pushed forward.
We've also not mentioned the Imprisoned. You fight him like 3-4 times, and there's also like an endgame challenge where you fight him again. So can we in good conscience
and
make
that's
that the game of the
time.
decade?
All right. Moving on to 2012's winner being Kid Icarus Uprising. Why does this game deserve or not deserve to be the game of the decade?
Hell yeah,
I feel like you
it
have a lot
deserves
of
it.
built up anger for this, Andre.
I'm waiting to bide my time.
I can't in good conscience argue against this game. It's my favorite 3DS game of all time. Yes, the controls can be problematic, but hey, left-handed person here raising my hand. You can't see me, but I am, and I had no problem with the controls. So I don't know what people are talking about when they say left-handers can't play it, but this is my favorite 3DS game ever, probably alongside Bravely Second. I can't argue against it. This game's incredible.
People might just be extrapolating from the fact that right-handers can't play this game.
Hey, I'm left-handed and I completely disagree. Playing this game made my hands literally cramp, and I can't think of any other game that has ever inflicted physical pain on me by playing it. So, Ash, I respect that you have a difference of opinion, but this game physically makes me hurt. I hate it.
Yeah, it's basically
Use your knee.
the knee argument.
Yeah, my knee is portable. I get it, John. It's still a bad game.
I think I'm the only one here who has not finished this game.
I've not.
Okay, because I did start playing it. I think I got to maybe Chapter 5, Chapter 6. I know Dark Pit appeared, at least. And then I either got distracted by something, or I just couldn't find a comfortable way to play. I tried to sit at my desk with that little prop. It didn't really work. I tried to sit on my couch. Didn't really work. I don't know. I just found a hard time getting comfortable playing, which sucks because everything else about this game has so much potential. I love that they talk so much and there's so many jokes. It is a riot. This game is shockingly funny.
It's like a roller coaster. Like the flight sections are so exhilarating. They're beautiful. There's a lot of story going on, and the actual level design, like the way they pace out the enemies, does feel like it's like the epitome of what rail shooters should be. It's just exhilarating, it's fast, it's frantic, and it never really lets up. I will say that I think the flight sections are definitely the strongest part of the game. The on-ground combat sections aren't as good. I still find them really enjoyable, but they're not as good.
I was going to raise that point. I think this game gets boosted by memories of the Sharp script and the flight sequences, because I don't know how we can nominate a game in which one-third of the game, charitably, is probably less than that, is so much better than the rest of the game. The on-ground combat has meandering level design. Doesn't control particularly well in comparison to the space sequences, and it just doesn't feel as good. It's not as energetic or fun or as well structured because it's not a rail. Not just because it's not a rail shooter, just because these level designs just aren't very good. I had memories of like old school Halo 1 interiors, and that's something I never want to be reminded of in a video game.
I will say that I feel like your weapons shine a lot more on ground, because there are so many weapons in this game. There's hundreds and hundreds. And when you're on ground, you can definitely get a better feel for how powerful these are. You can have clubs, you can have like regular snipers or something like that. There's so much of a variety to the ground gameplay, I feel. And that shines really highly in the multiplayer as well, which was genuinely really fun. And
it's funny, because I actually, as much as I love this game, I didn't really enjoy the multiplayer as much, but I do want to comment on something Derek said, that it's genuinely funny. Yes, and not only that, it's genuinely touching as well. The way this game shifts from being really funny to being genuinely emotional and, like, really, really dramatic, but it earns both, is great. And it has Nintendo's best villain. Sorry, Bowser. Sorry, Ganondorf. Hades, Nintendo's top villain. Straight up.
Best twist.
Best twist. Agreed.
Yeah. It's basically 2 games in one. It's a reboot and a sequel in one game.
Yeah, it essentially is.
I did not get that far. So I've not experienced Hades at all, so I'm very curious what makes him such a great villain for you guys.
It's mostly in his delivery. His delivery is really funny. Unlike his lines,
so good.
It's pretty great.
He enhances Medusa as well. I thought both of them are great characters on their own, but the way they intertwine and the way they sort of work together feels really good in this game.
You know what? I think I would say about Kid Icarus Uprising is I myself would find it probably to be a game I'd rather watch than play. I think you get better appreciate the dialogue without having to worry about the actual gameplay, and that applies especially for the on ground segments, which I didn't enjoy nearly as much as the aerial ones. So I think I think I'd prefer watching someone play this game than me playing it myself.
I do feel like if there ever were a sequel, I think they could make a near perfect replica of this formula, because it's already really fun. There are just some parts that aren't quite as good as
and that's time. So we are moving on to John. We're moving on to 2013's The Last of Us. I was a little bit surprised that this actually won. I presented it. I was the one who brought it to the table, and I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see this game being recognized for being a great game. It's one that and the interesting thing about this game is I wasn't a huge fan of it originally, so I don't know how much. Maybe it's from my own changes over the past 6 years, but I actually loved it when I played through it recently. I think it brings a strong narrative to games that I delivered on the level that we've rarely seen, and it combines that with compelling stealth and action gameplay, and that's pretty freeform. Like, it reminded me a little bit of Resident Evil 4, except you have more movement options in terms of like taking cover and using stealth. So I just think this was a really strong contender based on like its presentation and gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like it a lot more than the Uncharted games. I feel like it's far more involved, there's higher stakes, it's more personal. And one thing I actually really like about this game too is my fiance played it from beginning to end, which she very rarely does outside of co-op games. So it just shows how accessible this is. And I think even your dad played it, right, Andre?
He loves it. Yeah. I got nice. A PS4 with RE2. He did not like RE2, so he picked up Last of Us on his own accord instead and loved it. He's played through the game like 20 times now.
Oh my gosh.
Nice. No, The Last of Us is phenomenal. Like, I mean, it's so hard to argue against. It's a great game. It starts, I mean, the stakes just from the very beginning are phenomenal, and it sets the tone from the very beginning, right? That the true monsters aren't necessarily the infected, it's fellow humans, and it weaves that theme throughout the game so well and amplifies it. And I think really the only thing I can say against it is I do feel the pacing drops a little bit in the middle, somewhere around from like Billstown to the University of Colorado. That the pacing kind of drops a bit for me, but the game is still phenomenal, and I was more than happy to see it through.
I mean, you brought up a good point there, Ash, about how, interesting point, I should say more accurately, about how, the true enemy is other humans, not the infected. And, like, we've seen that plot line a lot. That plot has been used so many times in zombie, like, pretty much every time in zombie media. That's just the thing they want to say is the true monsters are the humans. And I am tired of it, but I also think it works because even the person you're playing as is not a good person. He's been corrupted and fallen because of this. And really the only true good person is Ellie, which is then makes protecting her all the more important. So I think that's one of its bigger weaknesses, that we've seen this plot a million times as far as humans are the real bad people, but I think Ellie is the bright spot of that. And
so bring up a couple points that I think that are interesting. Yeah, the actual idea of zombies is decades old now. But I think the way the game tells that story is pretty novel. Like, in that it focuses more on... I feel like I felt more of a connection with these characters than I did in any other zombie media I've seen, including the horrible Walking Dead, which I watched for seasons until I gave up on that show. And I think that's largely because of like how you're always with them, you're always playing as them, and it creates this unique bond between these characters that I think we've rarely seen before in most mediums. And then getting to your point about Joel being a bad actor, I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that, actually. And that's what I like about this game, is it invites discussion. Like, when I beat the game, I looked up something about the ending, I forget what it was, and I saw that there was like a debate about whether he made the right choice in the end or not, and I'm like, I didn't even think there was a debate about this. I thought it was like pretty clear cut, and the fact that there was a debate interested me. I like that people saw the ending differently from I did, and that we could discuss that, and that there was something to discuss, in contrast to most game endings, which don't have that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I remember just letting out a sigh at the end of The Last of Us, because I was just sort of disappointed in Joel.
Oh man, I was so happy for him.
Man, I agree with you, John. I was like, this guy is a ghoul. Like, what? How could he? And I can't say, of course, what happened, but I'm with you. I was like, wow, and what a great note to end on.
See, I'm more in Andre's camp. Like, I kind of selfishly wanted Joel to get what he wanted out of this thing, and I liked the ending for how it was. I thought it was the right move for Joel, but I can understand people seeing it the other way as well.
I will say that I think this would have been a really strong way to just end the franchise. Part 2 looks amazing, but I don't think it needed to happen.
Yeah, it could have stood alone on its own, but it made too much money, John, so can't let that stand.
Money above all.
All right, and that is time. So we're moving on to 2014's winner, being Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. John, do you want to start things off here?
Sure. Some of the best levels ever. There are so many great levels in this game. And when I go back to replay them, I never dread a single one. Whereas I play other platformers, I'm like, oh god, this level again. But when you play Mario World, sometimes there are these like slow scrolling levels. I don't want to do this one. I never have that with Tropical Freeze. I feel like this is just the epitome of great level design. It's just so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree with that. Tropical Freeze is a phenomenal game. There's so many things that it does so perfectly, and it's really hard to say anything against it. I guess my only thing is that obviously it's a little shorter than Returns, but it makes up for that with denser, more creative level designs. However, the whole Tropical Freeze theme does limit, to a degree, the level themes that you see in Tropical Freeze. However, not to any appreciable degree to where it's really a huge knock against the game.
Yeah, not like Mario Sunshine.
I'm not sure it does. When I went into Tropical Freeze, I guess I was expecting it to be like just sort of like Frozen themed levels, whereas only the last world is. I don't really feel like there's anything that is held back by the setting.
I think the one thing I would say Tropical Freeze did worse for me was I loved the Golden Temple levels in Returns. I thought they were incredibly well designed to be very, very difficult without being ridiculous, and I thought the end levels in Tropical Freeze, yeah, I beat them, but I didn't get that same sense of satisfaction from beating the Golden Temple levels in Returns. That might just be anecdotal, but that was my main thing that Tropical Freeze did not do as well as Returns.
Sure. I think one thing that when you put both games side by side, Tropical Freeze just feels more expensive. Like, there's a point in the first level where you go past like a ship in the background, and if you look at just look at what you're looking at, and you'll see that the platforms that you're on are the ship. And like no other platformer models an entire boat just for a couple of platforms. No other platformer lets you move the camera around into 3D space and like zoom off into the background like that. There's no other platformer that feels as tight and high quality as this.
I think you said it in your presentation, John, or maybe I imagined it, but this is like Uncharted in a 2D environment.
Yeah.
Everything's changing constantly. These environments feel incredibly dynamic and epic. I find this game to be pretty much 2D platforming perfection. I don't think it gets better than this in terms of 2D games. I love the hell out of it, so I have very, very few reservations about it in a gameplay sense.
Just a huge pleasure to play with tons of details. Like John pointed out the ship. I like the fact that the last level is full of Donkey Kong Country Returns callbacks. The fact that a lot of those levels are just frozen over and you can get that sense of nostalgia while still being completely different. And as Andre said, it's cool to go revisit levels with a new twist. And that's from the previous game. That's really cool and fun to see. Yeah, I really do enjoy this game.
And like water levels were a big part of the original DKC's legacy, and I felt like they ran with the idea of what water could be. Most platformers sort of like make water levels their own thing, but in Tropical Freeze you can dynamically go from land to water, which is something you very rarely see. And in like Sawmill Thrill, for instance, you're going through this factory, and your minecart is constantly being changed into something different, and you're going from being on rails to being underwater to then like this source spinning up platforms for you. It's just so dynamic.
Yeah. So I think it sounds like most of us at least are agreed it's good, but to play devil's advocate here, why is there a reason why this game shouldn't be Game of the Decade? It is just a platformer after all, right? It's just really refined at what it does. Is being good enough at being a platformer good enough to be Game of the Decade?
You can't play Grassland Groove and say this is just a platformer.
Well, and yeah, and I don't think you can really, and of course I know you're just playing devil's advocate, Andre, but you can't exclude any genre just for being what it is from being the best of the decade.
I think we can
Platformers
safely
are just as
exclude
viable
FMV games.
Fine, but platformers are just as viable as adventure games, as action games, fighting games, RPGs, whatever. My point is,
it is just a sequel
say,
though. It just improves mechanics that had already been established.
Okay, but almost
best
every
way
game on
possible.
this list is a sequel.
Yeah,
Last
exactly.
There's a few exceptions on here.
And Splatoon.
Yeah. But they
Plus,
also,
no, I mean, I also argued when I argued for Bravely Second. I said, and I agree with it, and I stand by it, that being the very best at what has come before and iterating on that is just as worthy of praise as completely innovating from something that's never been done before. So I think it's completely fine that Tropical Freeze takes what has been done before.
and on that note, that
perfects
is
it.
time. So we're moving on to 2015's Game of the Decade, being Splatoon. Why does this game deserve or not deserve to be our Game of the Decade?
I mean, not to be obvious, but it's fresh. I mean, that's the thing. It really did feel like a breath of fresh air from the moment we first saw it. When we were at E3 and that trailer first began with the squids jumping around, and you were like, "What is this? What do we get?" And then you play it for that first time, and I still remember playing it at E3 with that demo. And it's just like it clicked. It's like, oh, I get it. This is their version of a shooter. The mechanics make a lot of sense. And it just is like, I don't have to focus on combat. I can just focus on splatting everything and getting coverage. And it made it just so much more accessible than I ever expected. And it has personality to spare. It is filled with personality.
One thing I ran out of time to ask you about in your presentation, Derek, was the gyro controls. I remember playing Splatoon at a post-E3 event and picking up the controller, and instantly it felt good. This was the game that really pioneered gyro. Like, I think Ocarina of Time 3D had it before it, but this was the big game that really pushed it. And you don't really find shooters on Nintendo systems anymore that don't have gyro. That's how big of an impact Splatoon was. And when I play shooters on PS4 now, I wish they had gyro. It sucks that only one system's really pushing it, and that's because Splatoon made it that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's again, I can't really emphasize that enough. It feels so natural to play this game. And you immediately pick up on mechanics like, okay, I have ink. Oh, I can hide an ink. Oh, hiding an ink also refills my ammo. And, I only have so much ammo to use. And, going into squid form makes me faster. Like, you really quickly pick up on all the little nooks and crannies of the gameplay, and then it just sort of like, okay, find your best weapon, find your best kit, and go. Have some fun.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say Splatoon really is a team-based shooter, literally as only Nintendo could have done it. It is such a Nintendo take on the typical third-person shooter genre, and what they came up with is brilliant with the squid, the inklings and the ink, and that being your ammo, and there are so many different weapon choices. I mean, there are so many choices to fit different play styles, and we haven't talked about the story mode yet. It's got a fantastic single-player story mode, bookended by one of the best final boss fights in recent gaming history, in my opinion, and it's just a fantastic overall package.
One thing that Steve pointed out earlier was a lot of these games are sequels, and we didn't have Splatoon 2 on here, despite Splatoon 2 being more or less the same, but more. Do we think that's a problem with this?
I do.
All right, Steve.
So, I mean, to me, if we're talking about Game of the Decade, I think Splatoon 2, for me anyway, is the better game. It just released in the wrong year, where it was surrounded by giants. I think if it had released in any other year, it would have been on this list. So I think if it weren't up against the likes of Breath of the Wild or Mario Odyssey or dare I say it, Sonic Mania, Splatoon 2 would have made this list as well. And I think to me anyway, it's objectively better because it's the same game with more modes, more weapons, still a stellar single-player mode. The only way in which I would say Splatoon 1 is probably better is that I liked single-player's boss in Splatoon much better than I liked Splatoon 2's boss.
I will say Octo Expansion, though, is better than any other Splatoon single-player.
Yes, Octo Expansion is utterly lovely. I
actually wouldn't agree with that. I actually prefer the original single player still the best of them all. I guess one thing I think that the original Splatoon had that Splatoon 2 didn't is, as Derek was saying, it was just so fresh. So for me, I didn't find Splatoon 2 felt more of an iteration than anything else, and I didn't enjoy it nearly as much for that reason. It was no longer fresh. It was no longer new and exciting to learn the mechanics. We already knew them. And so even though Splatoon 2 may be on paper the better game, I'm not sure if I'd agree with that either, but even if it is, I think the lack of freshness might be a mark against it. It doesn't have the originality that the first game had.
Yeah, like you compare Donkey Kong Country Returns to Tropical Freeze, you can see the just uptick that Tropical Freeze brought. Right. While on the other hand, Splatoon 2, to compare to Splatoon, it is iterative. And again, I said this in my presentation, but this launched a new successful series on the freaking Wii U. That's how much impact it has. It had a best-selling album.
And that's time. Good point. All right, moving on to 2016's winner. We have Doom. Why is Doom the game of the decade, or perhaps not the game of the decade?
I kind of want to hear why you guys voted for this, because I'm not entirely sure a lot of you have played Doom 2016.
I played enough of it. I played like 3 hours of it at a preview event, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed myself, but not, again, I'm not a huge first-person shooter guy, so it wasn't enough for me to rush out and be like, I have to play this game now, although I absolutely admit it does what it does incredibly well, and I can see why it's so popular.
This is a year, John, remember, where I voted Super Mario Run as one of my top games.
2016 was kind of a barren year. That said, Doom's quality cannot be underestimated. Yeah, I played it probably at the harder difficulty than I should have, but even when I was playing it, it felt so satisfying to just kill the demons and do these challenges and whatnot. I think I only got bogged down by when I started getting into the bigger levels and had more demons to take care of, and I was searching for the secrets at the time. If I was to replay it, I would do a more streamlined run where I wouldn't worry so much. I'd also be in a lower difficulty, and I think my enjoyment of the game would be ratcheted up even more. So I can see its merits, even though I didn't get super far into it, because the basics are there, and as you said, it doesn't really change much outside of other weapons and other demons as you go along, so I got a good sense of what the game had to offer.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing was just, like you mentioned, John, how it rewards aggressive play. This isn't a game about being strategic or tactical in any way. It doesn't pretend to be that kind of game. It's just literally about getting in there and messing things up. And the glory kills are really satisfying. Like you said, just getting in there and ripping a demon's heart out of its chest feels like what we all imagined we should be doing in Doom 2.
Exactly, yeah. And I think there's a good point back there about the vertical slice of this game. You get a great feel for it immediately. As soon as the game starts, you rip chains off, start smashing zombies, you get a gun immediately. There's no downtime. If you're curious if you like this game or not, you'll find out within the first minute. It's just so good to play. The point about being aggressive, that's just the pure part of the gameplay. There's no cover. You're not meant to hide in this game. Hiding, you're at a disadvantage. You're meant to be out there ripping demons apart, shooting them, because that gets you health and ammo. So I feel like that just goes against the core of so many other shooters. And that's what I don't like about so many other shooters, is you're meant to hide, you're meant to wait, you're meant to be strategic. Whereas Doom is just so satisfying. This is the best stress reliever.
It's also surprisingly funny. I remember those moments early on where it talks about how we were trying to help better humanity, and Doom Guy just sort of glances over at a dead body next to him and then looks back. There's this dry sense of humor that comes through without even a word. It doesn't call attention to it or anything like that. It's just Doom Guy's persona is fantastic. This is probably one of the best silent protagonists out there, just because he emotes so much, and it's in first person and he emotes this much, and you get such a sense of him.
Absolutely. Like, if there's a button, he just punches it. Like, there's a point where you're meant to like get someone's eyes to open up this safe, and he just smashes their face into the scanner. He's relentless, and yeah, there's a lot of comedy in there too. And I feel like this kind of game could be really gross and over the top. And but I never looked away though, because I feel like it was cartoonish in its nature. It wasn't trying to be gross. It's just trying to make you feel powerful.
Right, and you know, I only got like a little taste of it, but I do remember the motion controls being pretty great when I previewed them. And John, you would say that the motion controls make the Switch version of an already great game even better, right?
Yeah, it wanted another playthrough. As soon as the gyro patch came through, I played through the entire game again. Yeah, I feel like when you look at Doom GIFs, you're probably going to see the PC version, because people are just like they're moving around left, right, and center, just shooting zombies every single time they come along, and the Switch gyro enables that as well. So, like, playing with the gamepad's fine, but you can really pull off some really cool stuff.
I see this being listed on here for 2016 and not 2019. Why are we discussing?
The PC version came out in 2016.
Wait, what? Yeah, but that didn't have gyro aiming, did it?
You can if you're playing on Steam. The Steam controller has gyro.
Oh, that was in the original release?
Yeah.
Oh, my bad. Totally misunderstood that. All right. Well, that's off to you, Doom.
Yeah. I've also heard, I can't confirm this myself, but apparently the stories, like, if you look into it, it's actually really good.
Yeah. I mean, the core story is loosely told. But if you walk around the environment, you will find these like projections of
and that's
holograms
time.
of people.
So moving on to 2017's winner, Zelda Breath of the Wild. Why does this game deserve or not deserve to be our game of the decade?
It's the most consistently fun game on this list.
I'd agree with that, but I think it lacks the highs that some of these other games might have. It's very flat.
I agree.
I'm going to put a knock against it early in, because I know most of y'all are going to have nothing but nice things to say. And I'm not even going to talk about the story. I'm going to talk about the shrines where you have to rotate things. Because those are terrible, and half the time I would find that my controller ended up upside down. I could not stand any shrine where I had to use gyro to rotate the environment. Like, overall, I think gyro works well in Zelda, but this is one place where it's just really bad.
I think there are absolutely flaws with this game, but I feel like those flaws just they feel like they don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because there's just so much that's so good about this game. Like, for what's maybe a couple of minutes of a flaw, there are 300 hours of greatness.
Yeah, it'd be really easy to complain about the dungeons and how they're not really much like the past dungeons, and not really all that memorable for a lot of the time. But as you pointed out in your thing, you may be spending 4 or 5 hours amongst all of them before
Right.
compared to the 100 hours everywhere else. Like, it's just not that huge of a deal, which could be a knock against it, because that part of the fun of Zelda is the dungeons, and I don't think the shrines are a great replacement. I think they're fun in their own way, but they're definitely not dungeons. That said, the build up towards Hyrule Castle and exploring all of Hyrule Castle when you reach it is some of my favorite moments. In the game.
It's a game about the wild. It's Breath of the Wild, and I feel like shrines are an extension of that. Like, you're meant to walk around and see these orange things in the distance and go to them and be rewarded for finding them. Same thing with Korok Siege. You're meant to see a mysterious tree and walk towards that, and then see something else in the distance. So, like, I feel like all the collectibles don't really matter, because it's not about the collectibles. It's about the journey to finding them and being curious about everything.
I think the core of what Breath of the Wild gets so right is that it genuinely is Zelda 1 for a new generation. They really did an amazing job of just really making you feel this is your journey. Hey, you just got out of this cave, go explore. And that is something that you don't, and you really can go anywhere you want from the beginning of the game, generally, not accounting for equipment and stuff, but that's not something that even really any other open world game offers compared to the way Zelda does it. However, that story is god-awful. That is a common pitfall in open world games. Breath of the Wild does not sidestep it, and I do have to give it a knock for the world, the vibe of the world, in the sense that Calamity Ganon's just chilling the whole time. When you're in Kakariko or when you're Hateno Village, you don't get the sense that the world's in any, not even immediate danger, any danger at all.
No one, back. That's the
yeah, no one gives a damn. Well, yeah, but it never feels like you're doing anything really that urgent. And I do have to say, I hated the dungeons. Well, not hated, but I didn't enjoy them.
Yeah.
Really.
I
Yeah.
actually liked the Divine Beast. I thought it was a nice change of pace. I definitely understand why people have that criticism, and I actually thought that the fact that people had just kind of come to terms with Ganon was okay in the context of the world. I mean, it's been a century since this happened, so a lot of people in the world were born and just grew up like, oh yeah, that's Ganon. That's his thing. But
that's a good point.
I think the thing that bothered me the most was, John, you like to use the term mastery in like a bunch of your PowerPoint presentations, and you talk about how that's a satisfying feeling, and I agree that Breath of the Wild kind of encapsulates that very well. You start out incredibly weak. You don't have enough hearts, you don't have weapons, nothing, and as you get better and you get through the game, you become almost this kind of unstoppable force. And I think that's one of the things that I dislike about Breath of the Wild is that once you have attained a certain level of mastery, nothing's really difficult anymore. There's nothing to challenge you once you've gotten to a certain point.
It's time to fight Ganon then.
Well, yeah, but even then, he's not hard. He's
Going off
incredibly
that,
easy.
Steve, this is why I think the game should definitely not have permanent weapons. I think you would get that feeling the entire time if a weapon couldn't break. And I think the Master Sword was already a preview of that, and I think the Master Sword does give you that feeling of, well, I can't be stopped now because I have this weapon that keeps coming back.
I also think the game could have been really helped by a hunger mechanic that wouldn't just let Link stuff his face endlessly. Like,
Oh, that would've been
I ate.
divisive.
No.
Yeah,
That would've
I
been
know,
divisive.
but
Hunger mechanics are the worst.
This game was a paradigm shift for Zelda and seemingly open world games in general. My main complaint is I played it for a ton of hours, had a lot of fun with that, but I have actually very few memories relative to how much time I sunk into it.
I have so many
and that's
memories.
time.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
I was going to say my memory.
Moving on to 2018's Game of the Winter, or Game of the Year, being Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Is that the Game of the Decade, or why does it not deserve to be?
I mean, it's the ultimate Smash game.
well, I guess I nominated this. I guess I'll kick it off. I mean, I think there's a strong case to be made for this being the Game of the Decade. It is, in terms of content, it's the biggest game I think that has ever been created in the sense of sheer content across the board: character, stages, music, items, everything, whatever. And it's also it's the best, it's the most refined version of Smash there's ever been. And I think it bears repeating. All of us here in this discussion, we are never going to see this happen again in our lifetime. Sakurai's already said it. Ultimate, whatever comes after Ultimate is not going to be what Ultimate is. And he has achieved something that none of us doing this or listening are ever going to see in our lifetime in terms of the roster he has put together and all the pure gaminess that is in this game. It's never going to happen again.
In your presentation, Ash, we grilled you for the lack of single-player content. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't care. I've put so many
Same.
hours into Smash, and I've done that with mainly just a couple of characters. I've been maining maybe like a handful, like maybe 7. But there are 7. I think there's over 80 characters now. And if you were to play as every single one of them and give them all a good chunk of your time, you could easily spend thousands of hours and still have continuous fun.
So counterpoint to that, I mean, you're not wrong, but I didn't spend thousands of hours of Smash Bros. Ultimate. I thought it was a great game, had a good time with it, but it's also the 5th or arguably the 6th game in the series. And I feel like it's it's still basically the same game at its core. It's still Smash Brothers, which is still strong, but I can only play so much Smash before I get tired of it. And I can still go back to it every now and then and have fun with it, but I don't feel like the pull or the hook that I had with earlier installments, because it's just so familiar now. It's so standard. For that reason, I don't see, it wouldn't be my Game of the Decade, because it's just a collection of things that came before it. It took the best elements of those games and just threw it into one package, and none of it feels particularly new.
I mean, that is kind of the basis of this game, though. It's meant to be everything Smash has ever been put into one game.
Except the
Right.
freshness.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that's fair. I mean, your mileage may vary with any game, right? If you don't enjoy Smash as much as I think probably John and I do, you're not going to get. I hear everything you said. I feel I could play this game forever. Every time I play with friends, or I go online, I don't get tired of this game. I've never even gotten close to getting tired of this game. But again, that is a very individual thing.
I feel like at its core, Smash hasn't changed a ton mechanically, but there's definitely under the hood tweaks that fighting game fans are going to debate forever. But we criticized Splatoon 2 just recently for not being as fresh as the original. Well, I mean, if that's true, Smash Ultimate suffers from the same fate. And I feel like even though it is this crowning achievement in terms of its roster, I don't think a roster necessarily makes a game worthy of being the best in its decade. You know, I'm looking at, I mean, we're about to debate, you know, another amazing game, one that I would say is inarguably better. There's just titans in this list, and I can't really in good conscience put Smash Ultimate, you know, up against them. But I couldn't put any fighting game against them, and I love fighting games. So I think for me, you know, I don't get the sense of adventure, which is what I'm looking for in a game that would be an enduring classic for me.
I mean, you are right in a lot of ways. I feel like this is the best that the current formula of Smash can ever be. I feel like it's so tight. They've met the perfect middle ground between what people want from Melee and what people want from just like casual Smash. And I don't feel like you can really top this unless you completely reboot Smash and have a brand new fighting system. I don't think you can get better than this.
I agree, and I kind of like, I agree with the freshness angle. It's true. This is not fresh. This is a perfectly refined vision of what has come before. But I also think freshness doesn't need to be a prerequisite to being the best. I think that's maybe just a little oversold. If you are the very best at what you do, as I've said, that is enough in my opinion. And at least for me, I never get tired of this game. I mean, there are over 100 stages. I put random on all the time. I feel like I forget there are stages in this game that I have played before because there's so much content. So, but yes, if you're not as into Smash's core gameplay as like someone like I or Jean is, then yeah, you're not going to get as much out of what Ultimate represents, and I completely understand that.
All right, one last point.
And that's time. Sorry, Steve.
Online is bad.
Moving on to 2019's Game of the Year, Dragon Quest XI's Definitive Edition. Why did this game deserve or not deserve to be our game of the decade?
Well, I presented this game as well, so I'll just say this really quick, Derek. As I said in my presentation, this is the JRPG that has come closest to Chrono Trigger since Chrono Trigger, and that, I think that alone says enough for now. So, Derek, I'll let you take over.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's basically coming down to my argument as well, is that this game feels like a legacy. Like, this feels like something that people are going to look back on for years to come and just recognize as a highlight and a hallmark of the genre, in the same vein as Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. Like, it really can't be estimated or underestimated in that fact, because it really is just a masterclass of the genre. And it feels like a must-play for RPG fans. It just does everything so well, barring some of the variety, musical variety.
That's what I was just about to touch on. Like, S does have orchestrated music. It sounds way better than the PS4 version, but it's still not the best soundtrack. Like, they repeat the town theme pretty much every single town. The overworld theme is good. The battle theme's a bit grating, but I completely agree from a gameplay perspective, from a story perspective. I think this is about as good as RPGs get.
Are you telling me there's no RPG with a better jump than this game, John?
Not many RPGs have a jump, so I suppose it's a low barrier.
Mario RPG had a better jump.
All right.
Oh man! So
I won't debate that.
I agree with everything you said, of course, about the music. The music is the main problem with this game, and I'm going to argue in the game's favor in the sense that you all here know how obsessed I am with video game music. It's so important to me. I'm so into game music, and yet the fact that this soundtrack is the weakest part of the game has not sullied my opinion of the game in general at all. That's how unbelievably fantastic and polished the rest of the game is, that I can honestly say that a middling soundtrack or a just not great soundtrack is okay with me. I wish it was better, sure, but the game is so good, it's hard for me to knock it that much for the music, and that says a lot for me.
It also says a lot that we complain about the music, but it still punctuates certain scenes so well. There are really devastating and emotional moments that the music really capitalizes on and pushes forward and makes even better. So I don't want to trash on the music too much, because there are some really great tracks in there, to be sure. It's just the variety isn't quite up to snuff as many would like.
And it speaks volumes that we nominated both 11 and 11S. It just sort of shows how much we appreciate this game. And 11S really is such a great version. One thing I really love is that the battles are much faster. On the PS4, you couldn't speed them up. On Switch, you can speed them up 3 times. It's just a much faster moving game because of that. And there's also a bunch of new content too.
If the battles were really that great, though, why would you want to speed them up, John?
Because in RPGs, you're battling so often, and sometimes you just want to get through it faster. I think
sounds like a mark against the game that has all this...
I don't think so. I think
I
RPGs
disagree.
are better for faster battles. I think Bravely Default sort of pushed that forward. In Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 on the Switch, you can make them faster. I think that it's just once you've seen animations a couple of times, it's okay to go through them faster.
Exactly. This is less an issue with Dragon Quest, and it's more endemic to the JRPG genre in general. You're going to have battles, whether they're random battles or not. You're gonna be fighting a lot, and so I think that JRPGs that counteract this by adding meaningful quality of life, modern features like being able to speed up some of that repetition, just makes it even better. But I don't think that's something you can levy against Dragon Quest XI specifically. That's just a JRPG thing.
You can which up for Game of the Decade.
It's so convenient to play. You can forge stuff on the fly. You can call your horses wherever. There's so much new content, completely new scenarios. There's so much to this game that it's insane, and I'm still going strong with it. I can't stop thinking about it when I'm not playing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really go beyond that because I don't want to spoil things. I could go into a whole spoiler diatribe about just all the amazing moments, and I can't even reference what it kind of does to give you a comparison point to just show how incredible some of the moments are. But other than to just play it. I mean, even if it doesn't get Game of the Decade, that's fine. Just play this game. That's all I care about.
It's a 10-hour demo. You got no excuse.
Yeah, exactly. It's rooted in tradition, but then it plays on those expectations of tradition to become something so much more than what you would expect.
And that's time. All right. Well, that's the end of our the games we selected as the nominees for Game of the Decade. But we still have 2 more left, everyone, because our audience has decided on both a loser's bracket winner as well as a wild card. So we'll start off with the loser's bracket. And as it turns out, Xenoblade Chronicles is the winner of the loser's bracket. So it came back from being evicted by us to re-enter the competition as a potential Game of the Year or Game of the Decade nominee, or rather, Game of the Decade winner. What's the argument you guys have for this? Should this game be the Game of the Decade or should it not be?
Thank God this made it back.
It's one of the best worlds. I think these 2 titans, the entire world being the bodies of them is so cool. Like, you can look up at any time and you can see exactly where you are. You can look up and see, there's a shoulder there, there's a knee there, there's a sword there. It's contextually the best RPG world.
Even better than Dragon Quest XI's Definitive Edition?
The world, yeah. The overall game, I'm not sure.
That makes it a little tricky because the combat, you're going with a very classic RPG with Dragon Quest XI's to an RPG that does a lot of things very differently compared to the 2. So I guess it feels a little bit more modern in how it innovates the actual battle system and what they go with that. And I don't even know if you'll like the jumping animation in this game, Andre, because it has it, but it still looks a little awkward.
I'm just saying that's why Super Mario Galaxy 2 is a true Game of the Decade, has the best jump.
It's funny, you brought up Dragon Quest, Andre, and it's funny because that game also has that sense of placement within the world where you can look around and see environmental features, like in Xenoblade, that are relative to where you are in the world, and I love that about Xenoblade. And I think this game's fantastic. My issue with it is that the side quests sometimes get a little rote, they get a little repetitive. I think there are too many of them. And I think sometimes less is more. I do love exploring Xenoblade's environments, but I think they can just be a little bit overbearing in terms of just how massive they are. And there's a lot of dead space in between the actual landmarks and that where not much is going on. But they are beautiful to explore, so, it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder if that's by design, though. Is it just to give you a sense of scale?
I think it is a lot of scale. It also, I like the fact that even in the starting areas, you'll find some monsters that are level 40 or level 50, and it gives you reasons to come back and explore and see these things that you couldn't access because you were just too weak before. And you're always going around, and it really treasures your time in the fact that you can teleport anywhere at any time. You can change the time of day to whatever you want to better suit your needs. It is extremely accommodating with what you need to do in order to get certain things done. And as Ash says, there is a lot of side quests. They can feel really similar. You might feel pressured to do them because it does say at a certain point that they will no longer be available. But that moment is way into the game, much more than you'd ever think. And I don't think you even need to go about that. to make sure to do all of those, and it clearly marks the ones that are necessary if you desire. There is so much to do here, and you don't have to do it all, and you can still enjoy the game for its really incredible story. Great cast of characters, great stakes, great ways that they kind of change up your expectations and where they go and what they do.
Refreshing voice acting too. It's very rare that you have RPGs have a British cast, and one of the main characters in this game ended up being a Doctor Who companion in like a couple of years after.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. Is Clara Oswald in Doctor Who was one of the characters in this. That's just really cool that they have. It just shows how good they are. Like, this isn't just some throwaway cast.
The quality of the voice acting cannot be overstated. It is truly fantastic. Shulk has the best video game scream I've ever heard, period. Plus, we also have to mention the phenomenal soundtrack. This is one of the best soundtracks ever to grace a game, period. Certainly way better than Dragon Quest XI's, and it is one of the highlights of this game, and there are many highlights of this game.
Granted, you have not played it, Andre, but how would you argue against it? Like, I mean, is there any way to convince you that this might be worth Game of the Decade?
No. I don't think there is.
I mean, that's the thing. That's what makes Game of the Decade so tricky, is because it's, people have their own tastes.
Yeah, I mean, the things that you look for in a game for Game of the Decade are not the things I look for in a Game of the Decade. That's what's great about this, is we will let the vote will decide along with our audience. So,
I do think it's telling that Xenoblade has popped up 3 times in this decade. It first released on the Wii, then the 3DS. Well, I guess not this decade, because it's coming out next year on the Switch, so in the next decade. But it just shows how much people love this game because it keeps coming back.
And the series is incredibly consistent because each time it's like, people were asking, where's this game at? When are you going to nominate this one? Because they're going by the different releases. Then we had X, then we had 2, all of them which got mentioned or nominated for these because they're just a great consistent quality to the series.
All right. Well, we're pretty much out of time, so I think we'll call it a day for Xenoblade Chronicles. So we'll move on to the final game we have here to discuss, being the wildcard pick from our audience. They decided one game that none of us brought to the table at all to bring to our final debate, and that is Persona 5. So guys, why do you think Persona 5 deserves or doesn't deserve to be our game of the decade?
Persona 5 being the wild card is so fitting.
Yeah, it really is.
It is.
It should win on that alone, actually. It's so good.
Style.
It's the most stylish game on this list, without a doubt.
It is full of style and characters that people love. It really feels modern in a way. It feels of its time. There's a lot of these games. Actually, pretty much all the games are either in the future or an alternate world or anything like that. This feels like it's in the real world. It addresses Japanese issues and it takes them head on. And it might not handle everything in the best way, but it's still just a incredible ride that is the easiest Persona, I think, to get into if you've never played any of the Persona games. And there's certain points where you just get really into what's going on, and phenomenal music.
I'm going to use the banned word. This game's cozy. It feels so good to hang out with your friends.
When every game is cozy, no game is cozy, John.
No, but it really does feel good just to chill out in this world and form friendships and just have a good time. Like the loading screen says take your time, and that is exactly what you have to do with this game. Just chill out, don't rush.
I'm glad you brought up time because I've tried for the last couple of years to get into Persona 5, and I feel like it's a game that profoundly does not respect your time. Like, you can't sit down and play this game for less than an hour and feel like you got anything done.
I guess it depends on where you are in the story. I think there are points in the game where you can literally play for a couple of minutes, do a couple of things like you can work up your skills. You don't have to go into dungeons or anything. You can just work up your social links. I think that's fine for a couple of minutes. But yeah, there are definitely parts in the story where it drags on for like over an hour.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, I think one of the bigger weaknesses of the game as far as time management is when you get close to the end of the game, it feels like it should end, but it just keeps going. And I did feel like, oh man, how is it still going? Like, when is this actually going to end? And it did bog me down a bit as I got to that point.
I have a question for you guys, Derek and John. So I admit I have not had the 100 hours to set aside for this game. I have, however, watched the Persona 5 anime, so I know the characters and the world and the context of everything. But I have done my research into some scenes that are shockingly a little homophobic and transphobic throughout the game in the way they represent these things. And it feels a little backwards in that sense for a game of the decade for the 2010s, and I'm curious how you guys feel about these elements.
I have no justification for that.
Nope.
They did the same with Catherine as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely problematic. These are not the best representations. They are definitely played for humor that it didn't even age well when they first appeared, and it's unfortunate. Thankfully, it's not in there a lot.
Right.
It is like in the grand scheme, they maybe make up 10 minutes at most.
That's what I've also
It's not
understood.
defense, though.
It's
And I
not
want
a
to make it
defense.
clear, I'm not saying that should disqualify Persona 5. I'm just playing devil's advocate with, some problematic things I know about it, but I'm not saying that makes it undeserving.
I mean, there's are some unfortunate elements to it. The girl that is dealing with essentially sexual abuse from her teacher is also the one the game decides to put all the fan service on.
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't think we can really say anything that puts this in a good light. So let's move on to something else.
Sure.
I feel like this game makes you feel really powerful at times. There are moments where the game's about overcoming your own fears, I suppose. And when you do that, it just feels so good. Because it's reflected in the palaces. Like, you have the real world where you're sort of going through these problems, and the palaces just sort of visualize all of that. And those moments where you first get your persona powers, they just feel so good.
Oh, they feel really good. And the fact that, when you go to steal the treasure and have those big moments, they have some incredible moments of feeling power, and the whole rebel aspect is really pushed to its limit, where you just feel good about every time you're taking down one of these adults and trying to bring justice to people.
Yeah, it's just a really great game, and I will say, though, I actually do prefer Persona 4, and maybe that's because I played it before 5. But I felt like 4 just had maybe a bit of a tighter cast, but 5's cast is also very good for different reasons.
I really enjoy 5's cast, and I like a lot of the upgrades they brought from 4, specifically the confidants and how leveling them
And
up
that's
gets you special
time.
rewards.
All right.
All right, and that is our 12 picks for Game of the Decade. But let's have another 5-minute round just to discuss where we're at right now. What are we thinking, guys? How are you feeling right now on these picks overall, and what are you kind of leaning toward? Like, what is your own metric for how you're going to decide the Game of the Decade vote?
It's going to be tough. There's a lot of really good games here, and for me, it's going to be a combination of the game I had the most fun with, the game I think has the most impact, and the game that will be looked upon the most fondly in the future. Like the game that you look back on and think in the same way as other classics, like Ocarina of Time or Super Mario 64 or stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with that, Derek. I think it's something that Ash spoke to earlier is something I feel a little bit differently about. Like for me, I think freshness brings such an important element to games. Like it's what allows me to feel highs or like better highs in the game, I think, than I would normally otherwise if it's something that I've seen before. And so I think for me there is like an inherent like I do gravitate toward something that offered something new, something I hadn't seen before, and I think that will be an important factor in my vote, but also, just being a really strong game. Like I want it to be fun, and it needs to be enjoyable for most of the game. I would say, like if there's any major pitfalls that are consistent, that's going to be an issue. So yeah, but if you have all that and you're fresh and offer something new on top of it, that's probably going to get my vote. So.
I mean, almost every game on this list is fresh. I'd say maybe the only one that's iterative, really, is, I guess, Mario Galaxy 2, but that's iterative in a great way.
And
I
Smash.
guess Tropical Freeze maybe as well. And Smash,
Smash
of
as
course,
well. Yeah. I would just say, like, John, you and Derek covered, really the characteristics I would be looking for in my personal game of the decade. However, for me, I would also add the game that made me feel the most. And I don't mean necessarily just from a story perspective. It could be that, but just in general, did it make me feel things from the story? Did it make me feel things in terms of what it represents as a game? Just in general, but my game of the decade needs to be something that made me feel very strongly emotionally, whether that's due to the story or due to the game itself.
I want to bring up one point about Breath of the Wild. One thing Andre said at the very end of the segment was he didn't have very many memories with that game. I have so many memories.
That's not what I said. I said relative to the playtime, the amount of memories I had of that game is less than considerably shorter games.
I still feel the opposite. I feel like every single time I boot up this game, I have a new memory. I think, unlike other games which maybe have like story or maybe level memories, I feel with Breath of the Wild, you can have just these radical events that can happen, which they just sort of stick in your mind. Sometimes it can be sort of story orientated, like when people first find the fishing village for the first time. I remember we uploaded that video about it looking like Outset Island. And people, like in the comments, people were saying, "Wait, I didn't even know this place existed." Like, that's what they were surprised about. Not that it resembled another place, but that they'd never even seen this place before. So just sort of discovering things for the first time, I feel like is a big memory. But I remember like so many things. Like I was riding on a horse and like something threw something at me and it bounced off my shield when my shield wasn't even out. There's just so many gameplay and elemental things that can happen that stick in my mind with this game.
I think they didn't stick out for me as much because so many of them just felt at the same level. Like I think I reached a point in the game where I realized once it didn't really matter what I came across. Like it all largely didn't matter, which just due to the game structure that it made less of an impact for me. It's like, yeah, there's another town. There's nothing to do here. Here's a Korok seed. Here's a valley that there's nothing in. Like I said, I enjoyed the game on the whole. It's just like I think it also was lacking in the smaller rewards. But Steve, what kind of metric are you using?
For me, it's going to be the game that personally I just had the most fun with. I think that for me to nominate a game for Game of the Decade, I have to reflect back on just which game I enjoyed the most, because it's my personal nomination, so I'm not trying to speak for the industry as a whole or anything grander than myself. So, I mean, I won't spoil my own nomination, but I feel like it's going to be the one that I will have the most enduring memory of, because like you said, Andre, a lot of games I play and they're just not very memorable to me. I don't remember anything, like highs or lows with them. I'm kind of sad Odyssey didn't make this list, because I do feel like I have a very strong connection to that game and very good memories of it, even though I trashed it during my presentation. But it is I feel like it'll be the one that I connected to the most personally.
All right. Well, I think that's a good way to wrap it up there, because we're pretty much out of time. But I think that's probably, I think you hit on it. What we're, largely what we're all going to be basing our vote on, I imagine. What left us a lasting impression. So with that, we are off to go vote, and you all should vote too. We'll have a link in the description. You can go there. You can vote on which game of these 12 is your game of the decade, and then we'll be back with the results very soon. And with that, thanks for watching, and of course, stay tuned to Game Explained for more Game of the Decade features and everything else too. And everything else gaming too. We'll catch you later. Bye.